we were dealing with children who are already engaged with drug use, and we know their experiences, but it would be very interesting to look at general children in the schools from certain age groups. That would be a methodology to be considered. And I think that would be very fruitful, because I don't really know whether India has actually got this on a grand scale about examining adverse childhood experiences in the general childhood. Doesn't have to be in treatment centres. I think that would be a nice comparison. Children who are in drug treatment centres and children who are not in drug treatment centres, and highlighting, well, what are they actually experiencing? And then we have to think of, well, what is the solution? We're just going to get the presentation up, and I'm going to be talking about the adverse consequences, experiences that children from 3 different centres in Delhi. One is called Kingsway Camp, which is for boys who have been involved in crime and drugs. The other one is Delhi Gate, and the other one, which is for boys just involved in drugs, and then Padabad Centre, which is for the girls, which is in Daryaganj. So really what we're talking about here is to get an understanding about the traumas that children that have ended up in these centres. And these traumatic events that occur with children tend to actually continue on from science and research into adulthood. So they continue on, and what happens, unfortunately, is that many of these children, as they become older, become dysfunctional members of society. It's a lingering thing that doesn't go away. So they can end up continuing on with their drugs. So when you talk about issues of abuse, these things could be physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. We talk about neglect. It could also be, once again, neglect by families. A lot of these actually have children, but they don't love their children, and these have very negative effects on the children. You have the household challenges, which has been mentioned, where some of the children are coming from households where drug use is endemic. You have domestic violence within the household. These have negative effects. And then you have all these other adversities. Bullying is another adversity. Some sort of childhood trauma that occurred. It could be communal, it could be terrorism. All these things can play a role. What tends to happen is there's also an increased risk of disease amongst these children as they become older. As a child, the diseases are not there. As they get older, there can be eating disorders. There can be things with diabetes, mental health conditions, depression, anxiety. These become pervasive and endemic amongst children as they then grow into becoming adults. They have all these health risk behaviours. They're not looking after themselves. They're eating poorly. A lot of junk food is being consumed. So they're not really looking after themselves. Social outcomes. For a lot of these children, what tends to happen, they also are actually not attending school. They're not completing their school. So then they actually end up in very poor employment opportunities or no employment opportunities. They can get involved in drug trafficking because you don't need any education to get involved in drug trafficking. So what we're looking at here is the more adverse childhood experiences, the likelihood that they're going to continue on. But if you have some positive sort of childhood experiences, there can be some sort of balance. So we need to look at these things. So we looked at the 3 centres. It was an overview. We wanted to understand what is occurring in these children's lives. Now, we've got a total of 80 participants. Now, when it comes to the adverse childhood experiences, this is a tool that's been around for about 25 years now. It's been used by UNICEF. It's been used by a lot of other organisations because we need to understand what is the long-term impact of an adverse experience for a child. Then we also looked at the positive ones, because if we have some positive experiences, it means we've got some hope. Then we're also looking at self-harm. If there is a lot of self-harm, that of course is one of those manifestations of adverse experiences. So these interviews were done over a period of a month. We could work out that the children could become uncomfortable about these questions. So we decided that we had one member who essentially memorized. So they weren't actually sitting there with a form. They could memorize the question line and do it in a very informal way, because a lot of the children from Kingsway Camp, they have to turn up at a children's court every 2 weeks, and they could be quite intimidated about giving truth in their answers, because that might actually have an impact on their discharge. In their mind, a perception. It wasn't to be, but in their mind, there was this perception. So at 45 minutes, and you can see, unfortunately, we didn't have enough girls, females, but at least we had an overview, and we could see the age group there. So when it comes to living in a household where people can be humiliated, they can be insulted by their parents or by other family members, you can see here it's overwhelmingly that they have had this experience. It's not a happy home environment that these children are coming from. Then you start looking at issues about a little bit of physical violence occurring within the household towards the child. Have you had these experiences? Once again, overwhelmingly, 90% have had these experiences. So these are children are not having good experiences within their own household. Now you look at these issues about what you would call sexual misconduct, safe touch, unsafe touch. Not so much. But when you look at the girls, you can see over 50% have had some sexual misconduct. Now you can understand the issue of a sexual sort of interference, something is a bit uncomfortable. These girls have actually overwhelmingly experienced something, and I think people know here that when girls have had, or boys have had, any sexual sort of interference by an adult, could be an uncle, it could be someone within a cousin or something like that, these actually have long-term very negative effects on a child's psyche, which will also have an effect as an adult. Now when it's about, have you felt loved? It seems a really naive thing to have love within a family. You would expect love to be there within a family. And we talk about having enough food to eat, having sort of like protection, or are people within the family high on drugs, etc. You can see here, under half, once again, have had these experiences. So they're really not a happy group of children. This is, and we now have the evidence to prove this. So were your parents separated or divorced? These things are very traumatic for children. We can see here over 25% have had it. We go to the next one, and we can see that it can rise even further when we start looking at the delegate children and also with the girls, that their divorce and separation within the household is actually quite considerable. And I think everybody would understand that a divorce and a separation is not very, it's a very unpleasant experience for children to have to live in an environment where there is a toxic environment where parents are fighting and arguing. So we look at the mother or a stepmother. Has there been, what we're talking here, domestic violence? Hitting by is towards the mother or the stepmother. You can see once again, just under 70% have experienced this within their own family. And living with someone who's got a drug problem within the family, over 60%. Not looking good for this environment of children. And the household member depressed or mentally ill or attempted suicide, the figure is smaller. Now we look at the people in the delegate one, and we look at the people in with the girls, but in the delegate one, it's considerably high, where depression, mental illness is happening, suicide, all of these things cumulatively have a very bad effect on the child. And a household member going to prison, of course this is a traumatic event for any teenager when their mother or father has to be going to prison. We look further down again, the next one. Now we look at, once again, delegate, the girls, considerable amount of their parents have actually ended up in prison. Traumatic events for any child. We look at the positive things. So overwhelmingly, can they talk within their families? Do they feel that they can express their feelings? Do they have a supportive environment? I would say no. These are not a happy family environment for positive things that can balance out the adverse experiences. Part of a community, yes, we do celebrate festivities. It could be Holi, it could be Eid. We're happy to be involved in those issues. But do I have this sense of belonging to a school? Overwhelmingly, no. This is where you get school dropouts. If you don't feel like you're part of a school environment, you're not going to persist, and you will then move into another environment that you're going to be highly vulnerable. Interestingly, supportive friends or interest by other adults, once again, very poor. If you felt like you are having good supportive friends, that's a good positive effect. 3/4 are not having this. So it's really quite disturbing, some of these feelings. And feeling protected by an adult, these don't need to be actually your parents, but they're just being people who are supportive of you. Once again, it's not a good feeling. We look at basically the manifestations. Self-harm. And we can see here about punching, which is not so high, but then we get these girls, for unknown reasons, they're actually scratching themselves deliberately, breaking the skin, creating a wound. I would call that self-loathing. They actually want to hurt themselves. Burning themselves, this is amongst all of them. Now, cutting yourself, this is clearly a self-loathing. And I look at some of the boys, particularly at Kingsway Camp and the Delegate, they get out razor blades, they're slashing themselves, and I'm going to do this. And you can see 70% are actually getting razor blades and cutting themselves. And interestingly, even when they've got a wound, they actually don't want the wound to heal. So we're talking very psychologically damaged people here, and they're only children. So what are they going to be like when they become adults? It's actually very ominous. They don't want their wounds to heal. Inflicting injuries, other injuries, it could be lighters, it could be just whatever. Sometimes I hear of the children banging their heads against the wall. It's very disturbing. So in summary, of those 5 questions regarding the positive, 60% have profoundly negative experiences. There's generally a lot of uniformity. Doesn't matter whether they're from the Kingsway Camp, the Delegate one, the Girls Centre, it's very similar. I would say a lot of the girls are having a lot of sexual, nasty experiences that have traumatized them. 50% have had family members going to prison. Traumatic for any teenager. Widespread inability to talk of their feelings, supporting from the family, friends, not feeling that they want to go to school. Large numbers of the participants engage in self-harm. They hate themselves. All of these children, on average, the general one is 15 to 16 years of age, teenagers, which should have a good future in their life. These children are fundamentally damaged children. They're going to be damaged children. We don't intervene. They're going to be very damaged as adults. There's no so there's a lot of discussion about where to go to strengthen their resilience. I'm not going to go through all of these, but clearly these children need ongoing, we're talking highly damaged children, they need counselling, they need psychological interventions. Even the Girls Centre does not even have a full-time counsellor. These children are really traumatized. We need to think of simple solutions, practical solutions, and then we can actually say we're actually doing something to help them. And from a judiciary perspective, I think this is important that you actually have an understanding. When any judge looks at a child coming in, can we actually fully grasp what these children have actually gone through? Often we don't know, but this is an opportunity for you to start thinking, we actually need to do something to help some of these children, or they are actually going to become criminals. We may not be personally affected, but the community in large are going to be affected by these children, because as adults, they're going to move into the world of crime, their drug use is going to be much worse, they're going to be dysfunctional, they're not going to be able to get into employment opportunities, and the list goes on. So that's an overview. For those, we won't have time to do what we've actually done. We now have the central government, and it was launched by the Home Minister on interventions within the schools, on life skills, doing things about education on drugs. The ball will start rolling for the schools of India. So this is our hope. It's called Navchetna. If anyone wants a copy of Navchetna, it's for children between, I think it's from grade 6 until to 11. It's an incredibly ambitious program, but we are passionate about doing this. And I've been to the Maldives. The Ministry of Education also wished to roll this out. WHO are currently interested in for South Asia, but we have to get the ball rolling in India. Because you've seen the context, India is in desperate need for this, so I thank you.